There's breaking news in Buffalo, New York. CBS News has confirmed at least 10 people have been killed today in a mass shooting at a supermarket in Buffalo. It happened at the Tops Friendly Market. Details are still coming in, but police say a gunman has been taken into custody. CBS's Michael George joins us with the latest. Michael.
Well, Lilia, new information is coming in by the minute, but what we can say is police say the gunman has been taken into custody. Now, authorities say the 18-year-old heavily armed suspect approached the store with a rifle and began shooting people in the parking lot, then moved into the store and continued shooting. The suspect is also believed to have been live streaming this shooting and posted a manifesto online. Now, inside the store, according to law enforcement, a security guard, a retired police officer, fired at the suspect, struck him, but he was wearing body armor. Law enforcement surrounded the suspect. He did surrender. Now, we're told that suspect is an 18-year-old white male. The motive is not yet known, but law enforcement sources confirmed to CBS the suspect was yelling racial slurs and had a racial slur written on his gun. Officials say the shooter is not from the area. He drove from several hours away to Buffalo. The supermarket is in a predominantly black neighborhood about 3 miles north of downtown Buffalo. And just a few minutes ago, we heard from the mayor about the pain this community is going through. Let's take a listen.
This is the worst nightmare that any community can face. And we are hurting and we are seething right now as a community.
And Tops, the store where this shooting takes place, released a statement to CBS tonight saying, quote, "We are shocked and deeply saddened by this senseless act of violence." And we have learned that the Attorney General and federal authorities have been apprised of the situation, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is on the scene and working to trace those firearms. Lilia?
Just horrific. Michael George, thank you for your reporting.
In the spring of 2022, a quiet Saturday afternoon in Buffalo, New York, turned into a nightmare. Shoppers at a neighborhood supermarket were doing what so many of us do without thinking, grabbing groceries, chatting with neighbors, living the small, everyday moments that make up life. But in a matter of minutes, lives were stolen, a community was shattered, and America once again confronted a painful truth. The threat of violent extremism, fueled by hate, was not fading. It was growing. This is the story of Payton Gendron, a teenager from Conklin, New York, who would become responsible for one of the deadliest racially motivated attacks in recent U.S. history. A story of how an isolated young man, consumed by hate and radicalized online, turned his anger into mass violence. It is also the story of those who suffered most, the victims, the survivors, and the community left behind. Payton S. Gendron was born on June 20, 2003 in Conklin, New York, a small town not far from the Pennsylvania border. The Gendron family was, by many accounts, typical of the area. His parents, both civil engineers, worked stable jobs. Payton was the middle child among 3 brothers. On the surface, his upbringing showed few obvious red flags. Teachers described him as quiet, sometimes awkward, but not overtly problematic. He did well enough in school to avoid scrutiny. His family lived in a modest middle-class neighborhood. For most of his childhood, Payton blended in. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. He spent much of his time online, retreating into the digital world where forums, message boards, and gaming communities became his refuge. Like many teenagers, he felt misunderstood, socially isolated, and out of place. But unlike most, he stumbled into dark corners of the internet that would fuel his descent into radical extremism. By high school, Payton's behavior began to raise quiet concerns. He was socially distant, rarely attended events, and had few close friends. His classmates often described him as a loner. Teachers noticed his lack of enthusiasm in class, though his grades were not terrible. The first major red flag came during his senior year at Susquehanna Valley High School. As part of a project, students were asked to imagine their future careers. Payton wrote about a fantasy involving violence, a shocking detail that alarmed some of his instructors. It was serious enough that the state police were contacted, and Payton was briefly referred for a mental health evaluation. But after a short assessment, authorities concluded that he was not a threat. He was allowed to return to school. The incident was quietly filed away, dismissed as a one-time lapse in judgment. Yet for Payton, that moment was pivotal. He had begun to test the waters of expressing violent thoughts, and he learned something, that he could walk up to the edge and no one would stop him. As he approached adulthood, Payton's world became increasingly centered on the internet, but not just any corner of it. He was drawn to extremist message boards and websites where racist ideologies thrived. There he encountered the so-called Great Replacement Theory, a white supremacist conspiracy claiming that white Americans were being replaced by immigrants, people of color, and minorities. It was an idea that had spread globally, fueling violent acts in New Zealand, Norway, and across the United States. Payton didn't just read these ideas, he consumed them obsessively. He began keeping digital diaries, filling them with plans, manifestos, and disturbing thoughts. Online, he watched live-streamed mass shootings, studied past attackers, and took inspiration from them. He wasn't just radicalized, he was preparing. By late 2021, Payton had turned his hateful ideology into action. He scouted targets, researched weapons, and even drove to Buffalo to survey potential locations. Why Buffalo? Because the city had a significant black population and Payton had made his target clear. He intended to kill as many black people as possible. He zeroed in on Tops Friendly Markets, a grocery store that served a predominantly black neighborhood. On May 14, 2022, he would put his plan into motion. On that Saturday afternoon, Payton arrived at the supermarket armed with a semi-automatic rifle. He wore tactical gear and a helmet equipped with a live streaming camera, broadcasting his actions in real time. At 2:30 p.m., he opened fire in the parking lot, killing multiple people before entering the store. Inside, chaos erupted as shoppers screamed and scrambled for safety. Employees tried to hide behind counters and in storage rooms. Within minutes, 10 people were dead. Most were black. 3 others were injured. But this was not random. Payton had written names on his rifle, references to other shooters, and hateful slogans. This was a calculated act of racial terror. Police arrived quickly, confronting Payton outside the store. For a brief moment, it seemed he might turn the gun on himself. But instead, he surrendered. Officers took him into custody without further violence. As the news broke, Buffalo and the nation reeled. Families rushed to the scene, desperate for word of loved ones. The community was left asking a single question: why? In the days after the shooting, investigators searched Payton Gendron's home and digital footprint. What they found confirmed the worst fears. He had left behind a sprawling manifesto, hundreds of pages detailing his racist ideology, admiration for other mass shooters, and step-by-step plans for his attack. His computer files revealed maps of the Tops supermarket, reconnaissance notes, and chilling calculations about how he intended to kill as many black people as possible. Authorities quickly concluded this was not a crime of impulse. It was a meticulously premeditated act of domestic terrorism. The Department of Justice joined the investigation. Federal charges were soon added, including hate crimes resulting in death, racially motivated violent extremism, and the use of a firearm in the commission of a hate crime. Just days after the attack, Payton Gendron appeared in court. Cameras captured the image of an 18-year-old boy in shackles, his face expressionless, his demeanor cold. The charges began to mount. First-degree murder under New York state law, followed by federal hate crime charges. Prosecutors made it clear this was one of the most egregious racially motivated attacks in recent American history. For the victims' families, the first court appearances were almost unbearable. Many of them gathered inside the courtroom, staring at the young man who had stolen their loved ones. Others broke down in tears as charges were read aloud. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Overwhelming evidence left little room for doubt. They had the manifesto, the live stream, the rifle, the tactical gear, and his confession. Prosecutors painted a picture of deliberate racial terrorism. They argued that Gendron had not only committed mass murder, but had done so with the intention of instilling fear in an entire community. The defense, meanwhile, faced an impossible task. There was no question of who committed the crime. The evidence was absolute. Their focus shifted toward mental health. They suggested Gendron's actions stemmed from untreated psychiatric issues, pointing to his previous evaluation in high school. But for the victims' families, this argument rang hollow. The court and the country demanded accountability. On November 28, 2022, in a Buffalo courtroom, Payton Gendron pleaded guilty to all 15 state charges: murder, attempted murder, and domestic terrorism motivated by hate. It was the first time in New York State history that a defendant was convicted of domestic terrorism motivated by hate, a chilling legal milestone. As the guilty plea was entered, sobs could be heard throughout the courtroom. For many families, it was the first sign of justice, but it was also a reminder of the lives that could never be returned. On February 15, 2023, sentencing day arrived. Families of the victims filled the courtroom. Some carried photographs of their loved ones. Others held hands, bracing for the emotional weight of the day. One by one, family members stood to give victim impact statements. Their words cut through the silence with grief, anger, and raw honesty. Some spoke of mothers and fathers who would never come home again. Others described the pain of children growing up without parents. Several directed their words at Gendron himself, condemning his hatred, calling him a coward, and demanding he face the full weight of justice. Then, it was the judge's turn. Payton Gendron was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge condemned him for his diabolical actions, telling him he would never see freedom again. During the hearing, Gendron briefly addressed the court. He apologized, claiming he was sorry for what he had done and that he believed in what he read online. But his words were met with skepticism and anger. For the families, no apology could undo the devastation.
I'm very sorry for all the pain I forced the victims and their families to suffer through. I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day. I shot and killed people because they were black. Looking back now, I can't believe I actually did it. I believed what I read online and acted out of hate. I know I can't take it back, but I wish I could. And I don't want anyone to be inspired by me and what I did.
Even after his state sentencing, Gendron still faced federal prosecution. The Department of Justice pursued hate crime charges that carried the possibility of the death penalty. In December 2022, Attorney General Merrick Garland visited Buffalo, meeting with victims' families. He promised that the federal government would seek full accountability. By 2023, Gendron agreed to plead guilty to the federal charges as well, in exchange for a sentence of life without parole rather than capital punishment. It ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, under both state and federal law. The Buffalo supermarket shooting left scars that could never fully heal. Families mourned, a community grieved, and a nation once again debated how hate spreads and how violence can be prevented. For Buffalo's East Side, the attack was deeply personal. Tops Friendly Market had been more than a grocery store. It was a community hub in a neighborhood with limited resources. After the shooting, residents were left without access to food for weeks, underscoring the tragedy's long-term impact. Nationally, the case reignited conversations about online radicalization, white supremacy, and gun violence in America. Lawmakers debated policies, but for many families, words fell short. They wanted action. The names of the 10 victims, cherished mothers, fathers, grandparents, siblings, and friends, became symbols of a community's resilience. And Payton Gendron, once an anonymous teenager in a small New York town, will forever be remembered as a convicted domestic terrorist, locked away for life, his hateful ideology rejected by the very society he tried to terrorize. The story of Payton Gendron is not just the story of one man's descent into hatred. It is the story of lives stolen too soon, of families shattered, and of a community that refused to be defined by fear. It is a warning of the dangers of unchecked extremism, of the power of online radicalization, and of the urgent need to confront hate in all its forms. Because in the end, justice in the courtroom can punish the guilty, but only unity, truth, and love can heal the wounds left behind.